He was tied to a tree. The ropes bit into his skin, rough and unrelenting. Blood crusted around his temple. His ranger badge had been ripped off and tossed into the mud. His radio was shattered, his voice silenced, and the jungle was too quiet. Until he appeared. The gorilla didn't charge, didn't growl. He stepped forward slowly, his dark eyes scanning the scene, not with fear, with something else, something more human than anyone would expect. Compassion. The god blinked, barely able to stay conscious, as the creature knelt beside him, massive, breathing heavy, but strangely gentle. The gorilla's fingers touched the edge of the ropes, then pulled back, touched again, tugged. The ropes held. The gorilla let out a low, thoughtful sound. A pause. Then he turned, scanning the forest like he was searching for something, or someone. He didn't run. He stayed, watching, guarding, because somehow he understood. Hours earlier, Ranger Mateo had gone out alone. It was supposed to be a simple patrol, just another sunrise shift in a forest he knew better than his own home. But something was wrong that morning. Trap marks, human boot prints where there shouldn't be. And then, voices. Not tourists, not locals, poachers. They caught him off guard. 3 men, armed, angry, looking for silverbacks. "You didn't see anything," one growled, before striking him hard across the face. Then darkness. He woke up bound, dizzy, bleeding, and abandoned, except he wasn't alone. The gorilla had watched the ambush from a distance. He had seen things before. Rangers with cameras, families on hikes. But he had never seen this. Violence. The scent of blood lingered in the air. The humans who tied the man had left, laughing. And the gorilla, curious, drawn, had stepped from the trees. What he saw changed everything. Back at the edge of the forest, a search team was forming. Ranger Mateo hadn't reported back. His jeep was still parked at the main station. His absence was sounding alarms, but the jungle was vast, and time was vanishing. The gorilla still beside him moved again. This time, he stood tall and let out a deep, echoing grunt, not of anger, but of signal, a call, a message, and then with a final glance at the man, he turned and ran. His giant frame vanished between the trees like a shadow. He ran not from danger, but toward help. Because somewhere, deep in that wild heart, something ancient stirred, an understanding, and a choice. Back at the forest station, 2 rangers stepped onto the trail. One of them froze. "There," she whispered, a shape in the trees, moving fast, upright, not a man. "Is that—" Before she could finish the sentence, the gorilla stopped in front of them, panting, shoulders heaving. He stared at them, then turned, walked a few steps, stopped, looked back, waited, and in that moment, both rangers felt the chill of realization. He wanted them to follow, and so they did. Far ahead, Ranger Mateo slipped in and out of consciousness. His breath grew shallow, the ropes bit deeper, but before the darkness fully claimed him, he thought he heard something. Steps, voices, and a sound that didn't belong to man at all. A deep chest thump and a low growl, protective, proud. Then a hand, a human one. "Mateo! Oh my God, he's alive!" The rescue was real. But the miracle had 4 limbs, a thick coat of black hair, and a stare that pierced right through the soul. The gorilla stood nearby, unmoving, watching. Then, without a sound, he turned back into the forest, gone, like he had simply come from the heart of the jungle and returned to it. But that wasn't the end. It was only the beginning, because some bonds don't need words. Back at the forest base, they didn't believe it. "A gorilla led you straight to him?" Ranger Imani nodded, her voice low. "I swear." He waited, turned back to check we were following. Like he knew. Another ranger scoffed. "Maybe you were just chasing shadows." But others, especially the older ones, stayed quiet. In this jungle, they'd seen things, heard stories passed down, half-whispered over campfires, of animals that sensed what humans couldn't, of creatures who remembered kindness and returned it. Still, no one said it out loud. They just looked toward the treetops, toward the place where it happened, and wondered. Mateo woke up 2 days later. His wounds had been treated, his ribs bruised, The swelling around his eye had gone down, but something in him had shifted. He sat in silence for hours, not from trauma, from awe, because in his memory, clear as day, was the face of the silverback. Not angry, not wild, watching, waiting. And in that quiet moment between life and death, Mateo had felt something ancient pass between them. Not words, not even thought, just recognition. Later that week they went back. Ranger Mateo insisted, not to search for tracks, not to file a report, but because he needed to go. "I just want to thank him," he told Imani. They entered the forest slowly, not with weapons, with open hands, soft steps, but the gorilla didn't appear. Not that day, not the next. Only signs, a distant chest beat, the rustling of branches, and once, high in the canopy, 2 glowing eyes watching before vanishing again. Still, Mateo waited, day after day, under the same fig tree where he had once bled into the roots. He stood, quiet, steady, and eventually, the forest answered. The gorilla came, not charging, not hiding. He stepped into the clearing like a returning spirit. Mateo didn't move. He just lowered his eyes, a sign of peace, of trust. The gorilla stopped a few feet away, breathing deep, his chest rising like the swell of a storm. Then, slowly, he lowered himself to the ground, sat, faced him, and in that silence, wild, sacred, suspended in time, something clicked between them. Not dominance, not fear, but understanding. The rangers began to whisper. "The silverback is watching him. I heard he follows him through the trails. They say he guards the station from the trees at night." It sounded like myth, but every myth has a root in truth, and this one was growing. One morning, a school group arrived at the sanctuary gates. Chattering kids, city-born and screen-raised. Mateo was giving his usual speech, safety, distance, respect, when something shifted in the tree line. Everyone froze. Then a gasp. There, just beyond the clearing, stood the gorilla. Massive, still. Eyes fixed not on the crowd, but on Mateo. The kids fell silent. Mateo raised a hand, not to wave, but in acknowledgement. The gorilla huffed, low and calm, then vanished into green. The moment was gone, but the impact wasn't. "He came to see you," Imani said later. Mateo didn't answer. He just stared at the jungle. Something was changing. The bond wasn't fading. It was deepening. But the jungle, like the heart, holds secrets. And not all eyes in the forest were kind. Because far beyond the sanctuary's border, someone had been watching too. Someone who saw value in fur, not friendship. Someone who didn't believe in miracles, only money. And so, while trust bloomed under the fig trees and between the shadows, a threat was already moving through the underbrush. One that would put everything, man, beast, and bond, to the test. Because not everyone believes that love can grow between species. But they were about to learn, the hard way. The ranger station went quiet that morning. A patrol team hadn't returned from the north perimeter. No radio, no tracks, no word. Mateo felt it first. Not fear, exactly, but a shift. A wrongness in the air. He grabbed his pack, his knife, and something he hadn't worn in weeks. His tranq pistol. "Just in case," he said to Imani. But she saw it in his eyes. He wasn't going alone. He was going to him. The northern jungle was different. Dense. Older. The trees whispered stories with every creak of their bark. The leaves overhead cast patterns like warnings. And beneath it all, silence. No birdsong, no monkeys, no wind, just absence. It was there Mateo found the broken boot. Half buried, torn at the sole, blood at the heel. He crouched low, then heard it. A snap, then a click, then darkness. They dug a pit, not deep but lined with thorns and wire. Mateo hit the bottom hard, shoulder first, his breath stolen by the fall. He tried to move, but the pain sliced through his ribs like fire. Above him, branches were dragged across the opening. A voice whispered, "Let him rot." Then footsteps. Gone. Whoever laid the trap hadn't expected him, and now they didn't care. For hours, Mateo drifted in and out. Sunlight turned to shadow. Sweat ran into his eyes. The scent of earth and blood grew heavy. He whispered to himself, not prayers, names. Names of rangers who never made it back. Names of silverbacks he'd watched die in snares. Names of those who saw too late. But just when his voice gave out, something answered. Not a voice, a tremor, then crack, snap, heavy movement, leaves shaking far above, and a growl, low, deep, ancient. It wasn't human. The branches above exploded. A shape dropped into view, massive and wild, the gorilla. He looked down, fists clenched, breath ragged. Then, without hesitation, he jumped in. The ground shook. Mateo winced. "No!" But the gorilla was already beside him, inspecting the wire, sniffing the wounds, eyes full of something not wild, but worried. Then, with impossible gentleness, he reached out, wrapped both arms around Mateo, and lifted. It shouldn't have been possible. The silverback rose with Mateo against his chest, cradled like a child. He scaled the edge of the pit with a strength that defied belief, and a grace that defied nature. Out of the hole, into the light, and into danger, because the poachers had heard it too. They emerged with rifles, 3 of them, mud-caked boots, scarves over faces. One raised his weapon. "Step back," he hissed. The gorilla didn't move. Mateo, still dazed, couldn't speak, but the silverback knew. He turned sideways, shielding Mateo fully with his massive body. A warning rumbled from his chest. One step closer, and the forest would echo with fury. The poachers hesitated, just for a breath. But in that breath, everything changed. Because from the treetops, other shapes appeared. More gorillas, big, silent, watching. A second silverback, 2 females, one adolescent, dragging a fallen branch. They surrounded the clearing like ghosts from the green. Not attacking, just present. It was a line, a choice. One of the poachers took a step back. The second cursed under his breath. The third dropped his weapon and ran. By the time the rangers arrived, called by Imani after tracking Mateo's GPS flare, the poachers were gone, detained hours later near the edge of the preserve. But the real story wasn't them. It was the image that greeted the rescue team. Mateo, sitting on a mossy log, his body resting against the silverback's flank, blood crusted at his collarbone. The gorilla's hand was on his knee, like a promise. They said nothing, just watched the forest breathe around them. And for the first time, no one doubted. This wasn't a story. It wasn't a myth. It was real. And it wasn't over yet. Because something had shifted in the roots of the jungle. A new bond had been forged. One born not of survival, but of love. Weeks passed. The jungle healed fast. Faster than most hearts. But in one quiet corner of the reserve, something had shifted forever. The cage meant for injured animals had a new sign. Observation deck, do not disturb. Not for tourists, not for researchers, just for 2 souls who'd survived something the world would never quite understand. Mateo sat there most mornings, his ribs still wrapped, scars blooming like old stories down his side. He brought fruit, sat cross-legged on the old wood floor, and waited. Some days, the silverback didn't come. Some days, he did. When he did, he never rushed. He sat across from Mateo, chest rising slow, eyes deep as time. Sometimes he'd nudge the fruit away, as if to say, "You came, that's enough." Other times he'd stay for hours, breathing in sync. Imani watched from a distance once. She said it was like witnessing 2 old monks meditating in a temple only they understood. No sounds, no tricks, just presence, a kind of love deeper than language. One day, the silverback arrived not alone. Beside him, a juvenile, not his blood, but clearly under his care. The young gorilla hesitated, then mimicked his elder, sat down, watched Mateo. Mateo smiled, silent, reached into his satchel, pulled out a torn piece of cloth, the same one the silverback had held in his teeth the night he carried Mateo out. He laid it between them. The young gorilla reached for it and froze. The elder made a low sound, not warning, permission, and the cloth passed hands. In the ranger station, no one used the word miracle, but they didn't have to, because something bigger had happened. Not just a rescue, not just a moment, a message that animals remember, that animals choose, that sometimes what we call wild is wiser than anything we teach in school. A year later, the station held a quiet ceremony, not for tourists, not for press, just for them. They planted a fig tree near the old observation deck. On the plaque, a simple engraving, "For the day the wild waited, and love answered." Mateo didn't give a speech, but he stood, hand on the bark, and whispered something into the wind. Imani later said the gorilla came that evening, alone. He sat by the tree, and didn't move for hours. There was no video of the rescue, no photos of the pit, but people came anyway, not to see something, but to feel it. Children brought drawings, elders brought stories of old spirits in the forest. A writer from Nairobi came just to leave a poem at the tree's base, and once during monsoon season, a school bus stopped by mistake. Rain poured, thunder cracked, and the gorilla appeared, stood at the edge of the trees. The children pressed to the windows, hushed, awed. One boy whispered, "He looks like he's praying." Maybe he was. Mateo never told the full story. He didn't have to. He carried it in how he walked, how he touched every tree like it remembered him, how he looked at every animal like it could speak. Because some things, the best things, are too sacred for words. And maybe that's the point. They say the forest changed that year. More gorillas were seen near the station. None were aggressive. The poaching signs dwindled. Local guides said the jungle felt awake, like something had risen and was watching over them. Some called it superstition. Others called it balance. But Mateo knew. It was the echo of one moment, when a gorilla jumped into a pit for a man, and the world held its breath. Final scene. A quiet morning. Mateo, older now, with gray in his beard, sits again at the deck. His hand rests on his knee. A shadow moves in the green. The silverback returns, but this time with the juvenile, now taller, stronger. The young one walks ahead, bold. He sits close and gently places a new gift at Mateo's feet, a piece of woven bark, like a bracelet. Mateo picks it up, smiles, no words, just a nod. The gorillas rise, turn, walk back into the forest, and the trees close behind them. Not like a goodbye, but like a promise. They will return, when love is needed again. The rains came and went. Seasons changed, but the story didn't fade. It deepened, like the roots of the fig tree they'd planted. Children visiting the sanctuary would ask, "Is it true? Did a gorilla really carry a man from a pit?" The guides always smiled and pointed to the plaque. For the day the wild waited, and love answered. They didn't need to explain more, because some truths don't need defending. They just need remembering. Mateo never left the sanctuary, not because he couldn't, but because he no longer wanted to. He'd seen too much, felt too much. The city felt like a different planet. Here he walked every path barefoot, learned the names of every tree, sat in silence, not because he had nothing to say, but because the silence said enough. One morning, long after the headlines had disappeared, Mateo received a letter. A child from a school in Kigali had drawn a picture. It showed a gorilla with a heart-shaped mark on his chest, holding hands with a human. Below it the words, "I want to be brave like him." Mateo placed it inside a wooden box. Inside that box were only 4 things: the torn cloth from his rescue, the bracelet made of bark, a leaf from the fig tree, and that drawing. He called it his truth box. He said, "If the world forgets, I won't." Imani retired that year. Her final report wasn't about poachers or wildlife statistics. It was titled, "The Intelligence of Compassion." She wrote about the rescue, without sensationalism. She described the behavior, the choices, the eyes, and in her final paragraph she wrote, "Some animals survive by instinct, but some love by decision." One late afternoon, under an amber sky, something happened. The juvenile, now a powerful young silverback, returned, alone. He walked to the fig tree and sat. Then he reached into the earth beside it and began to dig, slowly, purposefully. Mateo watched, breath held. The gorilla unearthed a stone. It wasn't large, but it was smooth and carved. A symbol. 2 hands, 1 gorilla, 1 human, etched together. Mateo knelt, touched the stone, and placed it beside the plaque. No ceremony, no crowd, just understanding. That night, the forest echoed with unfamiliar calls. Not warning, not fear, something else, like a hymn, a celebration, or maybe a welcome, for love, returning home. Years later, When Mateo's beard had gone white and his step had slowed, he built one last structure, a round hut near the fig tree. Open walls, no roof. Inside, benches carved from fallen trees, a circle of candles, and a space in the center for stories. He called it the listening place, where no one interrupted, where silence was honored, where children could sit and feel the heartbeat of the forest. One day a boy came running to the hut. "Sir, there's something on the ridge." Mateo followed, and there, against the sunset, stood the silverback. Not the old one, not the young one, a new one, eyes bright, posture proud. Beside him, a female, and between them, a baby, small but strong, the third generation. Mateo's eyes filled, not with tears of sadness, but of awe, of knowing the story was not over. It never would be. Final moment. Mateo sits beneath the fig tree. He's holding a walking stick carved with gorilla tracks. Beside him, the truth box. He opens it, lays the contents out one last time, then closes it gently. He looks up. The trees sway. The wind hums through the leaves. He smiles, because he knows. They are watching. They remember. And when the time comes, they will act again, because the forest never forgets the day it chose love.